Hello and welcome to Straight to the Comments, where we read the comment sections of tabloid news articles. Please stay to the end of the video to hear my opinion on this topic, and of course let me know your opinion by leaving a comment. Please like and subscribe.
Why it's us parents are to blame for the age of the narcissists. Dominic's and Brooks' verdict. After spending years observing how today's self-righteous youth are convinced they know best, and it's all our fault for indulging them. Ever since I was at school, I've been fascinated by the strange tale of the Children's Crusade. It began in the year 1212, with a boy wandering across France and Germany. As the boy told vast crowds of wide-eyed admirers, he had been chosen by Jesus to lead a crusade of children to the Holy Land and convert the Muslims to Christianity. In an age of intense religious faith, obsessed with saints and heretics, the boy's message struck a powerful chord. Soon he had amassed tens of thousands of young followers, who airily dismissed their parents' tearful protests and joined the boy on his long march south. For weeks they walked, weathering storms and sunshine, towards the very edge of Europe. And then, well, I'll come to that later. Today, when we live in an age of children's crusades, this story feels unsettlingly resonant. We too are fixated with saints, such as the Swedish teenager Greta Thunberg, and heretics, such as the novelist J.K. Rowling. Thanks to her harangues about climate change, Miss Thunberg has even landed her own BBC TV natural history series, which, according to the press release, will follow Greta's international crusade. Yet she is not a politician, and still less a scientist. She is, quite literally, a child. Why do we abase ourselves before her adolescent hectoring? And why do we indulge so many other teenagers and twintissima things? From the woke warriors who want us to tear down our statues to the student mobs who want to rewrite the entire university curriculum. With admirable timing, one of Britain's most influential academics has just produced an answer. In his new book Why Borders Matter, the sociologist Frank Furedi suggests that parents themselves are to blame, having failed to set proper rules and boundaries, spoiled their children, and raised a generation of infantilized, entitled narcissists. Professor Furedi's book has other provocative things to say too. But given the past few weeks' disturbing scenes of screaming mobs and Twitter tantrums, it's his thesis on parents and children that is most striking. As he points out, the dividing line between generations is probably more blurred today than it has ever been. Parents and children play together, including on video games, in ways that would have been unthinkable even in the 1970s and 1980s, when I was growing up. They share similar enthusiasms, watch the same films, listen to the same music, and they even dress the same, with fathers and sons in identical combinations of jeans and t-shirts, or mothers taking fashion tips from their daughters. That certainly wasn't the case for most of the last century. In many ways, this unprecedented closeness is worth celebrating. Parents are probably kinder than ever before. The old rule that children should be seen and not heard has virtually disappeared. Physical violence has become very rare, and children can talk more freely to their parents, even if they don't want to. But two other aspects of this story are rather less edifying. First, most children are becoming adults later and later. Many millennials, born approximately between 1981 and 1996, so now in their mid to late 20s and 30s, are still living like teenagers. They drift from one temporary job to another. They marry later, and have children later, if at all. They spend their money on rent and entertainment, rather than on a mortgage and family. They are, in fact, literally irresponsible, which I mean not as an insult, but as a statement of fact. Is this their own fault? No, far from it. And in fairness, the process has deep roots. My own family history tells the story. More than a century ago, my grandfather left school at 14 to become an office boy. By the time he reached his early 20s, he was leading what we would consider a fully adult life, with a wife, a steady office job and regular financial obligations. His childhood pleasures were fully behind him, and the behavior of today's twintissima things would have struck him as the stuff of some mad fantasy. Yet today, the world my grandfather took for granted has simply ceased to exist. For young men and women, steady stable jobs are much harder to find, which explains why so many stay in education for longer. The days when you joined a firm as an office boy and retired as a member of the board have gone for good. On average, most people tend to change jobs every 5 years, with rates even higher among the young. As for perhaps the ultimate symbol of adult responsibility, home ownership, it has become more elusive than ever. More than half of the baby boom generation owned their own home by the time they were 30. By contrast, the proportion among millennials has fallen to less than a third, and is even lower in London and the southeast. According to some housing experts, perhaps 1 in 3 millennials will never own their own home, while half will rent well into their 40s. In other words, the system might have been designed to prevent young people from taking on responsibilities, as their parents and grandparents did at the same age. Why does this matter? If you don't give people a stake in the system, a steady job and their own home, you can hardly expect them to defend it when it comes under attack. And if you treat people like children, then they'll act like them, as we're now finding out, both online and in our city centers. The most pernicious development of all, though, is surely the exaggerated appeasement of youth, epitomized by the Thunberg cult. As Professor Furedi argues, this has been coming for a long time. Ever since the late 1960s, when the liberal media fawned before such titanic thinkers as John Lennon and Mick Jagger, there has been a sense the only opinions that matter are those of the very young. During the Brexit debate, for instance, I lost count of the number of times I heard ultra-Remainers complaining that older voters had "betrayed their children's future," or rubbing their hands with glee at the prospect of elderly Leave voters' impending deaths. As Professor Furedi points out, one People's Vote placard read, "Adults ruin everything. Stop Brexit." But what sane person sides with an unseasoned teenager over an experienced adult? During the recent Black Lives Matter protests too, it has been blindingly obvious that there is one rule for the young and another for everybody else. So although mass gatherings are banned during the pandemic, the police actively aided and abetted mass gatherings of youngsters shrieking about the supposed racism of their elders. Even the BBC, or rather, especially the BBC, worships at the cult of youth. In recent months, its programming has become ever more slavishly directed at teenagers and 20-somethings, while staff are now expected to declare their "preferred pronouns" in their emails, as demanded by a handful of militant transgender activists. Yet at the same time, the corporation has just ditched the Andrew Neil show, despite the fact that the 71-year-old veteran is by far its best political interviewer. And to cap it all, the BBC has scrapped free TV licenses for the over 75s, whose opinions and values are routinely dismissed as reactionary relics. Other societies, especially in Asia, respect the wisdom of their elders. We don't. We pack our senior citizens off to care homes, out of sight, out of mind, and pray to the coronavirus. No wonder the future belongs to China. So is this all the fault of the parents, as Professor Furedi argues? Well, I certainly don't think they, or rather, we, are blameless. Adults, after all, are often just as irresponsible as their offspring. You have merely to read the gossip columns to know that self-indulgential misbehavior is certainly not confined to teenagers and millennials. Indeed, if you were drawing up a charge sheet against my own generation, Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980, it would be hard to know where to stop. We are probably the laziest, most gluttonous, most obese and most self-indulgent generation in history, from our obsession with fast food to our enthusiasm for cheap flights. And no, I'm no saint, before you ask. Even our political life betrays the same fundamental irresponsibility. What other generation would have indulged the self-aggrandizing showmanship of Nigel Farage, or the risible sub-student union posturing of Jeremy Corbyn? So it's not surprising that our parenting style is not exactly a model of discipline and seriousness. Too many parents refuse to set rules and boundaries, from screen time, now at least 4 hours a day on average, to bedtime. And far too many treat their children as sages, role models, or even moral guides. Parents need to stand up to their children. They should teach the time-honored values of discipline and self-restraint, as well as the trendier ones of creativity and self-expression. And instead of hammering into their children how "special" they are, parents would surely do better to teach their offspring a little humility. After all, in a world in which more than 100 billion people have lived throughout history, how many children are truly special, except to their parents? Still, parents aren't solely to blame. Many institutions seem determined to grovel before the cult of the young. I think, for example, of the Royal Shakespeare Company at Stratford, which recently scrapped a subsidized ticket scheme sponsored by the oil giant BP. The scheme had allowed the RSC to offer cheap £5 tickets to local youngsters, a generous and laudable gesture, you might think. But when a handful of politically engaged schoolchildren complained about the link with BP, the theatre bosses meekly agreed to ditch it. You could hardly find a better example of self-defeating cowardice. Some of the worst examples, inevitably, are our universities, whose well-paid bosses are never happier than when pandering to a tiny minority of entitled activists. My blood still boils when I think of the spineless foolishness of the University of Liverpool, which recently renamed a hall associated with the reforming Liberal Prime Minister William Gladstone, because his father once owned slaves. But the issue goes deeper than statues or buildings. It never ceases to amaze me that many university lecturers annually genuflect before their students, asking them if they would like the classes to be a little easier, or the marks a little higher, and whether they would like them to teach something different instead. Who cares what the little sods think? You're the experts, aren't you? I don't deny that it's natural and healthy for teenagers, and for 20-somethings to demand change, from Miss Thunberg at the UN to the anti-racism activists in our city streets. But it's equally healthy for their elders, sometimes, to say no. A decent society depends upon a balance between young and old, novelty and tradition. When that balance tips too far, as it has, then something has gone badly wrong. That brings me back to the Children's Crusade, perhaps the greatest indictment of juvenile folly in history. According to the legend, the children got to the shores of the Mediterranean, where a couple of merchants offered them safe passage to the Holy Land. You can guess the rest. The children arrived, not in Jerusalem, but in the slave markets of North Africa. There was no escape. Their parents never heard from them again. For those who think that young people have all the answers, there's surely a lesson there. The young are not always more virtuous, and they are certainly not always wiser. And often they need to pipe down and grow up. Because as any parent surely knows, even the brightest child is often totally, utterly, irredeemably wrong. The best rated comments. All my nieces and nephews who are in their 20s are lazy, spoiled eternal students who are on numerous gap years, or living off mummy and daddy, and have never had a full-time job in their life. I'm child-free by choice, and keep getting told that I will have no one to look after me when I get old, but then this lot can't even look after themselves, let alone anyone else. I've literally never heard Greta come up with a single idea. It's all about blaming everyone else for their ideas. Agree 100,000%. Parenting today is practically non-existent, and on top of that parents encourage these behaviors and coddle them. I always said millennials are the generation that will end Western civilization as we know it. Sadly, kids have been spoiled rotten over the last 20 years. Little princes and princesses, overindulged and allowed to do as they like. No discipline at home. and the poor teachers not even allowed to speak sharply to the kids without parents screaming and threatening them. Parents have become hugely complacent, and parenting skills far too hard work for them. A lot of families have covered up their laziness by boasting they are modern free-thinking parents. I call it rhymes with kite parenting, who have actually created selfish, boorish, celebrity-chasing, arrogant, lazy monsters. They have been brainwashed by communist/Nazi/far-left, anti-establishment organizations, and some teachers, parents, and tutors RV encourage this. We see them for what they are: stupid, childish, spoiled brats. We now have Walker Flakes. Outraged by everything, ashamed of nothing, yet to achieve. As a TCHR, I've seen it for years. The mummies of boys coming in, ring, or sending emails etc. to complain that their poor little boy is stressing because he is expected to do the same work as the other class members. Hardly ever had a daughter's parents complain, always mummies and their little boys. And these are 12 over 13 years old. So much truth in this article. The one thing that strikes me when I think back to the difference between my upbringing and my own parenting is this: my parents brought me up, and by the time I reached 18 it was almost a case of, get out there now, and get on with it. I have been much more involved, and more generally immersed in my children's lives. I seem to worry and obsess far more than my parents ever did. I don't know when or why this change happened, but I do know one thing: my parents had it right. We seem to have sleepwalked into an uber-competitive, selfish social mentality which has become all too normal. Kindness is sadly not as popular as it used to be. As the proverb goes, empty vessels make the most noise. Perhaps this applies to today's angst-ridden youth. Too many teenagers going to a university for worthless degrees. They're in for a shock. Sensitivity, self-righteous, and an overwhelming sense of self-importance does not put food on the table. I do fear for the future generation. When everyone believes the world owes them a living, there's nobody left to actually achieve anything. Pure stagnation. Knew there was a reason that ICAN*T stand children. Right on, brother. You forget the education system too. There are many young people who are leaving higher education with good degrees, including the science, who don't even know the basics of the subject that they have their degree in. This particularly applies to chemistry in my own experience. It's absolutely shocking what's gone on and is going on. It's because they have been told from a very young age that they are important and that their opinions are important. They have no filter, and they do not understand other people's point of view without feeling hurt, distressed, and angry. Trouble in store. I really hate this Greta girl, but what I hate even more is that she is given so much airspace everywhere. Just shut up, young girl, and go to school where you belong. Fully agree. Of course, what do you expect? Parents are not allowed to discipline their kids nowadays. They grow up without respect, or learning actions have consequences. Plus sometimes both parents sadly have to work, so strangers have to bring them up, and they don't really care, do they? The reason is some, not all, have grown up in an age of parenting where they are never told they are wrong when they've done wrong, and never been told to take ownership or responsibility for their own actions. It's always someone else's fault, not theirs, hence all the bandwagon protesting. This is the downturn patenting has took over the last 30 years or so, and now society is reaping what it sowed. Very well said and spot on. I'm a parent of a preteen and a high school teacher, and at times, think I'm the only one actually setting boundaries for my child. The pressure she feels to have everything comes strong from her peers, mainly due to their parents giving them everything. It horrifies me to see 7-year-olds coming out of school and being handed their devices at the school gate by parents who use them to keep their kids quiet, but then don't appropriately monitor usage or check the content they are viewing. It's my belief that lazy parenting and the ever-increasing power of social media is leading to our little narcissists who believe followers are the real power and meaning of life. Social media has a lot to answer for. It's the internet actually doing most of the damage. Well-written article. I was born in 1962 and I agree. In comparison to my parents, I probably didn't say no enough. I've been lucky my children are now grown up, with good jobs in their own houses. Blame leftism. Excellent article. The young of today are in for such a shock when they realize they can't cope with adult life. Discipline begins at home. Setting a good example at home is vital. No discipline at home, then none at school, produces the youth of today, with a few exceptions of course. Social media doesn't help either. What hope do we have? Absolutely true. The pendulum has swung too far from Victorian treatment of children to today's overindulgence and over-tolerance with no structures in place or boundaries being set. The young have become the leaders and the parents do their bidding. No surprise that society has gone to pot, because this is not the natural order of things. Brilliant article. Now the thought police will want to cancel you out. These days you can only express an opinion if it is a political correct opinion. Is it time to bring back national service? How can youngsters comment on a life they are yet to live? Reality check incoming. Both myself and my husband tell our children how it is. If they don't like it, they know where the door is. As a result, we have 3 children who are hardworking and well adjusted. We will help them all we can to progress in this world, but they have to work just as hard to achieve their goals in life. Spot on, but don't lumber me in the we are to blame Generation X adults. I wasn't scared of saying no to either of my 2 children. I was parent first and a dad second. If you are one of those we are to blame adults of today's millennials, hang your head in shame, because your offspring are embarrassing. It is quite incredible how such a poorly informed bunch, if children think they are so worldly and knowledgeable, and instead, if instilling respect and knowledge in them, we enable their pathetic lazy attitudes. I just reads the headline and I agree. He speaks the truth. The worst rated comments. At least Greta is famous for something more than endless selfies / flashing of wealth / trout pout / starring in a trashy reality show and so on. You're right, the world's a mess, because of your generation. Greta is a wonderful, courageous human being. Gross generalization point. There's good and bad in all generations. Sandbrook represents a sector of society that takes no responsibility. Why demonize a generation that keep the NHS and care homes going? And those in the armed forces and the police. It is easy to criticize others. Most people who do this have never really achieved anything themselves. Well, I'm a grandparent many times over now, but have to say, when I was a youth, I knew best. It is natural and part of the rebellion process during teenage years. Before criticizing today's youth, sit back a while and think what you used to get up to at that age. Be honest. Also, if still alive, ask your parents what you were like. Ask them to be honest with you. You probably will not like what they tell you. Summed up in the words of a 1960s song, why can't they be like we were, perfect in every way? What's the matter with kids today? Nothing has changed. Adults criticize youth. Thank God they are standing up and saying what our generation didn't. I'm in my 50s and I agree with a lot of the placards. They are in general more enlightened than us. It quite often children addressing the key issues which us adults are too busy to bother about. What a bunch of stinking right-wing tribe. Look at all the geriatrics on here slapping each other on the back. Lol. You're not special. You are irrelevant now. Is this a joke? Boomers are the most narcissistic, spoiled generation ever to walk the planet. Jobs for life, fat pensions, houses, no war, and still constantly winging. The younger genitarian just inherited the appalling world left to them by the selfish, uneducated older generation still alive. I think he means the university-educated ones. So predictable and boring, the oldsters having a whine about the youth. You lot had it so easy, everything on a plate. Even got council houses for free. So just shut your traps. I'm bemused by this piece. Your headline is very misleading, and for most who only read headlines in this comic, have misunderstood your article. The older generation are the ones completely in the wrong, yet critically responsible for the next generation. But to criticize young people for demonstrating their beliefs is bonkers. It's their rite of passage, and if it's about race or the environment, get over yourself. In short, it's not our future, it's theirs, and they have every right to fight for it. Unless you have something helpful to add, they don't care. And why should they? We have let them down badly by letting them play on their games, by voting for Brexit, not me included, by voting for crusty middle to upper class idiot politicians, by charging them a fortune for university, for not offering the young enough apprenticeship, etc, etc. The narcissists are those who have focused on getting over their divorces, to find themselves, for example, instead of their children. You may not believe this, but there was a time when Dominic Sandbrook had a career and was respected. And now it's this. Populist BS for populist-loving readers. I personally think the biggest difference between the generations after the 80s and before is that our brains haven't been rotted in childhood by leaded petrol fumes. A rather confused and rambling piece that tries to conflate far too many issues and comes to muddled conclusions, even if some of the points are very valid. Yes, children need boundaries when growing up. There's a whole psychology behind this, but without them, they become diminished adults. But to throw in Greta Thunberg, whose voice is a clarion call to look after the planet when all around her just dither, is simply egregious and distracting. She is a one-off and someone to be cherished, and totally irrelevant to the point of the article. I don't know, there is a generation that robbed everyone, and became super rich, and controlling without regard for the environment. So an article about self-righteous youth by a self-righteous middle-aged person. Middle-aged people are 100x worse. Always fighting change, if it inconveniences them slightly. Children have rights too. If they object to wild animals being killed by trophy hunters, then call it out. Children can stand outside their town hall to protest at the closure of their youth center. Are we suggesting that children should be seen but not heard? If a 13-year-old child has a talent to play sport, you do not hold them back. Likewise, if little Greta was outraged at the lack of action by adults to stop climate change, then her understanding of the environment and science should be welcomed. Articles like this is why the Daily Mail is the laughingstock of British tabloids. Daily Mail wishes it was 1940 forever. The old are not always more virtuous, and are not always wiser either. Personally, I think what Greta Thunberg says is far more adult than anything whining posh boy Dominic Sandbrook has ever said. So Mr. Sandbrook, as a historian, do you really believe that turning the clock back is possible? Judging by this laughably reactionary crowd pleaser column of yours, designed to yank the chains of the old and angry, the answer seems to be yes. I used to love your documentaries. What a letdown, dull old frat you have become. This article is catnip for the smug, self-satisfied boomers on this site. Wallow in it, people. What a miserable article. The author sounds really bitter. Joan of Arc was a child campaigner, so stick that in your pipe and smoke it. Another biased and divisive article, young versus old. As for violence is rare, where on earth did that statement come from? How is this a bad thing? If you raised your kids to be aware of the issues around them, and to challenge the things they believe are wrong, then you should be proud. Not ashamed. The most recent comments. To all the people in their 50s/60s complaining about the youth of today, the generation before you thought exactly the same as you. Just look at George Carlin's thoughts. Saw you exactly the way you see people in their 20s now. This current climate is a mix of both failure in parenting and a lack of personal responsibility. The boomers were spoiled growing up at a time when jobs were easy to come by and houses were still affordable, yet they love to criticize those younger than themselves who didn't have the same opportunities. And before you start, I fall between the boomer and millennial generations. As such, I know a lot of people from both generations, and I can tell you that the boomers of my acquaintance are a lot of more carefree and financially irresponsible because they can afford to be, whereas most millennials I know are more cautious due to the insecurities they have faced in the job and housing markets, etc. However, despite their good fortune, I have also noticed that many of the boomers I know love a good whinge because things haven't turned exactly as they have wanted, and people don't always behave exactly as they want them to. As such, if you're looking for a generation that love moaning, look no further than the boomers, the original whinging snowflakes. Tear down our statues, rewrite our history. So the author's statues of skate owners, his history, school history, or white kings and queens, no truthful history of the British Empire. Exactly. However, it's nothing national service can't fix. The young have always rebelled against the old. But don't worry, they will get old and their turn will come. The youth have the looks and no brain. The older generation have wisdom, some of them, and looks gone. That's the cruelty of it all. Quite frankly, I'm looking forward to these little dullings getting the cold shower of reality when they have to stand on their own two entitled feet. Hard work is the future of survival, and entitlement is the lead weight round your ankle in this lake of life. Unless you came here on a dinghy, of course. Left-wing liberalism is the problem. No punishment in schools. Soft policing. Soft courts. Soft prisons, and yes, the worst of it all is the soft half-hearted, it's not my fault liberal parenting. You reap what you sow. The older generation have always hated the youngsters. This is nothing new. This is why I'm so grateful that until the age of 9, my son was raised on an island in Thailand. He had a great childhood there, running free with his friends on the beach, away from technology, other British children, and the British school system. We are here now because I have cancer and my son needs to have some formal education to prepare him for university, and then he can become a marine biologist. He sees the children at his school and doesn't understand them. He doesn't like their attitudes, their lack of respect, and their low work ethics. I'm told time and time again how well behaved and polite my son is, and I'm proud that I have raised him this way. Not just parents, also teachers who live in a child's world and not the real world. The answer is simple. We don't. The vast majority of adults couldn't care less. It's only the simpering media that promotes these vacuous children, as if they have the experience or real world knowledge to lecture anyone. Brilliant article. I have worked with many families where the child is the alpha of the house and the parents look at you like herd puppies. I don't think narcissistic is the correct term. This article is totally misplaced and just panders to the typical Daily Mail reader. The narcissists in this world are elsewhere. The media education establishment have spent many years planting bias and ignorance in their minds, plus the selfish instincts of their social group's desire to hang on to power by attacking anyone who is not part of it. Greta Thunberg hosting a BBC TV series? Even more reason not to pay my license fee. I'd love to smash those placards over their heads, the ungrateful sods. The young of today know all the answers. The problem is they don't know what the questions are. Good stuff. And does anyone in their right mind really care what the self-indulgent little s**ds are thinking? They just a bunch of oversensitive childish $$IES who don't take responsibility for anything and blame everyone but themselves. Overgeneralizing much. 100% let be free rubbish and friends to our children doesn't work. Children even at 15 need set boundaries and bedtimes. When they get older, how are they going to cope with the adult world? Ah, waddidums, poor little snowflakes. Time to man up and grow some. The trend of millennials dads calling their children mate hasn't helped things in my view. Greta, she has such evil eyes. I know some teachers who act like children and are supposed to be educating our young. A generation of children who think it is their given right to have what they want. In order to appreciate what we have in society, the feeling of earning it and working your way up in a career was what taught my generation to value and respect what life gives us. Unfortunately, we have a generation of some children who think it's their given right to have what they want without sacrifice, fame for being on TV and no talent, lack of respect for their peers, and over-righteous approach to life. They need to do some national service between school and the workplace to be taught true values of life and respect in society, to create equilibrium in life. Mostly, now there is an app for it instead. Like the app for motorway accidents for pretty ladies that refuse to participate. Let us not forget the role that schools and teachers have played in empowering children. And also the extreme left-wing agenda of some of the leaders of the teachers' unions. The job of parents is made much harder by the cowardly approach of schools. And the fact we pay them way too much attention for their loony left-wing rhetoric. Particularly the powers that be, oh, and not forgetting the BBC. Most of these idiots will have changed their tune by the time they reach middle age and realize the Marxist left simply want to take most of their hard-earned money off them. Every youth generation has its protesters, but I think one of the worst thing parents can do is try and be their child's BFF. It is not healthy. Boundaries reinforce who is the parent and who is the child, and for that the rest of us will be eternally grateful, as there is nothing worse than tantrum throwing 30 and 40-year-olds, of which we have plenty. I believe that social media, combined with the mainstream media's worship of anything viral, bears a great deal of responsibility. Parents have always indulged their children, as any dentist will confirm. But somewhere there has been a paradigm change in attitude, and we need look no further than the birth and growth of internet fame. The attention-seeking, selfie-taking, social media obsessed, oh please tell me I'm amazing, even though I haven't achieved anything, entitled to everything, work for nothing, unaccountable half-wit generation. About 20 years ago the government passed a law which made it illegal for parents to smack their own children, and there you have it. Do us adults know any better? A lot of teens were helicopter parented in the 2000s and free to roam social media alone. This is the result. Media, teachers, and parents let this carry on. In the end it's down the parents. Okay boomer. Parents, schools, teachers, media, take your pick. Through circumstances of life I don't have kids, that's the way the cookies crumbled. But I've looked on from the sidelines and seen the way that kids have ruled the lives of their parents and got most of what they wanted by demanding things. They have scared their parents into giving in, not necessarily giving them things, but letting them do what they want, when they want, and how they want. It's created a horrible group of people. Obviously not all young people are like that, but I'm afraid a huge number feel entitled, and this will be awful for the future. For themselves and for their own families. Woke. They are empty batteries being remote controlled by electrical signals. Walking disposable handsets. They are not free, they are slave, and try to assimilate any humans they find. There are some fantastic comments on here, and everyone referring to stupid kids who go to university get a worthless degree, no life skills or common sense, and absolutely no idea how hard life is. I interviewed a guy a few years ago who had a degree in aeronautical engineering. Most of them are still at school. Schools are for learning, yet they think they know everything before their learning is complete. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. A master's in something else was 24 and had not had a job. He could hardly communicate and had zero personality, and the job was a driver's position. The youth of today are thick. They know nothing about life, only a mobile phone. They have no thoughts for anyone but themselves. The language they use is unbelievable in public. If technology had to fail, you would see them stood on street corners like zombies, not knowing what to do. Then the older generation would rule the world. Boy in his mid-30s still living at home, brings his large car onto the drive and his father washes it for him. The boy merely goes inside. He doesn't even help his father with the job. A good example of being so pandered to. Inevitably, boy has failed to mature as you might have expected by his own midlife. I'll not say on here what I think of this self-indulgent generation. I'll get banned. Thank goodness they aren't all like snowflake know-it-alls. Most of them are still at school. Schools are for learning, yet they think they know everything before their learning is complete. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
That concludes the video. Thank you for watching. Please let me know what you think in the comment section. Personally, I think it's just a case of the usual age complaining about youth, a tale as old as time. Please like and subscribe for 4 videos a week.